Got my cap on, got my tracky bottoms on, got my my nice Supreme jumper on, because today you find me in the VW Golf R Mark 7.5. One of my favorite looking Golf R generations for certain, but also the car that is frequented by youths, myself included. I am 28 years old and therefore I'm going to class myself for now as a youth. How's it going, people? Welcome back to the channel and welcome to another video. Yes, a VW Golf R, a very simply spec'd one actually, quite an understated spec given that it is all black with nice silver alloys, nothing over the top, nothing too crazy. What I want to talk about today is whether this car is worth a hyper hatch title. Now, in the world of hatchbacks, there are hatches, there are warm hatches, there are hot hatches, and there are hyper hatches, which has kind of come along in the last maybe 10 to 15 years with the introduction of the A45 AMG, a car that took that 2-litre turbocharged inline-4 and made it something different, something more aggressive, something faster. It added some flary bits into the equation, and all in is just a way more ridiculous and over-the-top experience for a hatchback. This Golf R is kind of in that category somewhere. It's over 300 brake horsepower, but I'm struggling to get it over the line of hyper hatch. That's not to say that it's not fast, as you can quite clearly see. It certainly wants to go, absolutely, but does it want to go to hyper hatch levels? Now that's what we're going to talk about today. So make sure you hit the like button, subscribe as well if you're new. Without further ado, let's get straight into it. First of all, let's talk about the word hyper. Now, hyper in the world of supercars applies to hypercars, cars that go above and beyond what you would expect out of your average everyday supercar, as if you can get an average everyday supercar. But like a 458 isn't a hypercar, obviously, but a LaFerrari is a hypercar, despite obviously some quite major similarities between them. Same badge, very similar platform, etc, etc, etc. Pagani's, hypercars. Koenigsegg's, hypercars. And the first thing about this lovely Mark 7.5 is that its badge is a VW. Not particularly hyper, but it's hatchbacks we're talking about, and VW are among the kings of hatchback creation. So that's not the end of the world. The Mark I Golf GTI is regarded as one of the grandfathers of the hot hatch world we see today. So this long descendant of that car that takes it to a whole different level and is obviously faster than the equivalent 7.5 GTI, it only feels natural that you'd call it a hyper hatch. Although a lot of things about it don't give me that impression, and some of those I'm going to tell you about in terms of looks in a second. Now, does it have features above and beyond what we would expect of your average Golf hatchback or a GTI and everything? Yeah, of course it does. It is more powerful, it has better suspension, solid brakes. I mean, like, watch this. Just lost my camera. That's the camera has just gone flying off the chair. Apologies, the camera went flying. So and that was all my fault, completely my fault, for deciding to brake check my camera out of existence. But I'm not quite getting the hyper part quite yet. So let's go back to Motorland, who have given me this car today to drive around in. Motorland in Beckenham, who I've done a bunch of videos like this with recently, and I'm going to continue to do more with as well. Go check them out if you haven't already, link in the description down below. And let's really look at whether we can genuinely call this car a hyper hatch or not. So we have to talk about looks of this car. Does it look like a hyper hatch? Long story short, probably not. I actually genuinely think it's one of the best looking modern Golfs you can get. I actually think the 7.5 is way nicer looking than the 7, for example. However, you compare this to an A45S AMG, or you compare it to an RS3, and it doesn't quite have the same level of aggression. I do love all the extra little bits of trim and the fiddly bits around here. I like the alloys. I think it's a good looking car overall. I prefer it in 3-door to 5-door spec personally, but all in, I wouldn't say it's in hyper hatch territory in terms of looks. If we think about hyper hatches in the same way we think about hypercars, there has to be something extra about the way that they look. The Pagani Huayra, insanely over the top. The Koenigsegg's, all insanely over the top. The P1, the LaFerrari, they're all over the top. They look different to your average supercar. This doesn't look that different to your average hot hatch. Jumping on the interior, I also think it's a really lovely place to be. Look at these lovely seats. They bolster you quite nicely in here. As a place to be, it's lovely. I would say I've driven a lot of VW Group cars. I have one as my daily driver. And it's not that different to other VW Group cars. Yes, it's sportier. Yes, it's more aggressive, but there's nothing hyper about this interior. Comparatively, the A45 has a way more aggressive interior. I think this one's nicer. I genuinely think it's got a nicer interior than the A45, but the A45 is more aggressive in there. I prefer the minimalist vibe that you get in here. And I prefer the material quality as well. The material quality is actually quite nice. So this one here, I think is 19K. Obviously it's in really good condition, great mileage. You can get these starting at around £14,000, which is pretty similar to cars like the A45. Yes, the A45 is slightly older, but it is definitely more of a hyper hatch experience than this, which isn't to say that I don't like it, but this definitely feels a lot more sensible. I feel very at home in here as a VW driver. In the nicest way possible, it feels a lot like many of the VWs, Skodas and Seats that I've driven in the past. Also, if it's power and performance you care about at the 15K region, like 15 to 20, just get like an M5. Get an F10 M5, way faster than this. But I do get it, I'm a fellow hot hatch lover. And with that, let's take it for a drive. The first and most important thing I need to tell you about driving this car is that it feels pretty much like any other Golf. Actually, when I'm driving this, I could forget the fact that I'm in a performance version of a Golf. I could completely forget that. Now, I'm not a badge snob in the slightest, so for me, this being a hyper hatch has very little to do with the word Golf. It has very little to do with the badge VW. That to me doesn't matter at all. It genuinely, for me, whether this is a hyper hatch or not, is all to do with how well it stacks up against the key competitors that we consider to be hyper hatches. But as I say, cruising along, I'm very comfortable, I'm very happy. There's no reason why I wouldn't want to drive this as my daily driver. And to be honest, with how chilled out it is to drive at these kinds of speeds and how much it is like a normal, everyday, average daily driver, I'm surprised at the reputation that it's garnered for boy racers buying it. Like, I don't understand why a boy racer would rock up and buy this car, if I'm perfectly honest. As I've just shown you, it doesn't look as aggressive as some of its competitors, and to drive at slow speeds, it doesn't feel as exotic as them either. So it genuinely does surprise me that so many boy racers have bought into these as their choice for a fast, hot hatchback or hyper hatchback that you're going to tune and do things to and make look crazy and all the rest of it, and why they've garnered the reputation that means that I'm dressed as I am today. And that brings to a very important point about these obviously appeal to a much younger generation of drivers, but they're also becoming quite unobtainable for those drivers. Someone actually came into Motorland to buy this car this week before I had the chance to review it, and they could not buy the car because they couldn't get insured on it. The insurance, because so many young drivers have driven them and crashed them and done all the rest of them, they've been stolen so many times, it was unobtainable, which tells me that for a lot of young people, this can't really be their market. So instead, I think that the market that these cars now appeal to isn't really the younger driver who's looking for their first kind of hot hatch or hyper hatch or whatever. I actually think this is a sensible car now. This is for someone who's really into cars, right? They've probably got a couple of nice cars to bash around in, weekend cars, that kind of stuff, and they want something to drive during the week. Something that's got decent fuel economy, it's decently quick, turns a couple of heads, but all in, it's just a nice, comfortable, sensible car to drive around in. Now let's see what happens if we stick it into manual. It's quick, it is quick. Yeah, it's quick, and it road holds incredibly well. Road holding is lovely in it. It's a really good car. All this nonsense I've been saying, like kind of playing it down, etc., I need to do that because it isn't as aggressive and all the rest of it as you would expect of a car that is knocking on hyper hatch territory. Sounds good when you floor it, but I wouldn't say it sounds incredible. It sounds just good, right? What I'm trying to get across here, that it's actually quite sensible. It's not got that killer instinct of a hyper hatch. And now a lot of that is in part of what I'm about to tell you, okay? This car has a 2-litre turbocharged inline-4 engine. It puts out about 305 brake horsepower and does 0 to 60 in around about 4.5 seconds. First of all, the engine, 2-litre inline-4 turbo, not dissimilar to the vast majority of other hot hatchbacks. The VW Golf GTI 2-litre turbocharged inline-4. Also comes the DSG obviously being, I think, probably the better option if you're going hyper hatch territory. You want paddles to click through and compared to the new GTI, yes, it's a lot lot more powerful. The new GTI has around about 245 brake horsepower. This being an older generation is 305. Very nice. But compare it to an A45 and it's pretty telling. The A45 puts out 415 brake horsepower from its twin-scrolled 2-litre inline-4 engine. 415 brake horsepower versus this one's 305. That is insane. This has a quarter less power than the A45S. It's also cheaper, worth pointing out, but that is definitely in hyperhatch territory. And then let's compare it to the RS3. The first thing I wanted to mention was the engine. The RS3 has that 2.5 litre turbocharged inline-5, which is a magnificent engine, sounds incredible, has carbon buildup problems and all the rest, that kind of stuff, but actually as an engine, proper cool. And I would much rather have that kind of inline-5 soundtrack to my hot hatch or hyper hatch experience than this. Then let's think about the RS3's power. It's 395 brake horsepower, I guess it's 60 in 3.7 seconds. The A45 is in about 3.5 seconds as well. They're almost a second faster to 60. They've both got almost more than 100 brake horsepower more. This is not knocking on their doors. It's simply not knocking on their doors. Maybe it's a poor man's entry into hyper hatch ownership. That's maybe the best I can give you, but my gosh, it's how comfortable it feels going. So it is beyond like your typical hot hatch in my head. Like a hot hatch, you kind of want to hustle. You want to hustle a hot hatch around. GTIs kind of let you do that, particularly older ones. Newer ones are getting a bit too fast in my opinion. I don't really think this is a car that you hustle around. There are certainly faster cars that you can buy within this price range. There are faster hot hatches that you can buy within this price range as well, but I can't say it doesn't shift. The all-wheel drive and all the rest of it really gives it like a proper bit of punt behind it. Look, it's not insanely fast, okay? It's not insanely fast, and that's what's making me struggle to really call it a hyper hatch. I don't know where to put it. It's not a hot hatch. It is more than a hot hatch. It's like, it's a hot hatch by tomorrow's standards, and it's a hyper hatch by yesterday's standards, if that makes any sense. The overall experience is not hyper hatch territory. I'm being super pedantic with these hyper hatch versus hot hatch stuff, but it doesn't give you that experience. It is a Golf. Here as I cruise along at 40 miles per hour, it's a Golf. So who do I think should buy one of these? Personally, I think that if you are of an age where insurance is no longer your kind of main problem when buying a car, and you want a fun daily driver, this fits that category beautifully. There's actually one back at Motorland that has been modified quite heavily. It's been remapped, that kind of stuff. You can definitely take them to those kinds of levels, and I think if you want to do that, then great, yeah, 100%. It's possibly the right car for you because it's quite a basic starting point. You're not kind of ruining anything, you're just adding to something that is very basic, very simple. There's a huge aftermarket for these things. Plenty of people have done plenty of stuff to them as well over the years, so there's loads of cars you can take inspiration from, and they do look good when you've modified them a bit as well. But that's kind of their niche for me. So, hyper hatch, probably not. Nice car, absolutely. Would I want one as a daily driver? Probably. I think if you can get insured one of these, and you can buy it for around the 15K mark, life's pretty good. So please do go check out Motorland if you haven't already. They have this car up for sale for £19,000, give or take. Let me know in the comments down below your thoughts on the Golf R. If you own a Golf R, let me know, have I done it justice in this review? Do you agree or disagree with my opinion about this car? But thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.